I am 35, regret leaving my wife, F29, at the airport. My wife got a new job where she started making several times what she was making before. I was incredibly happy for her since this was her first time making six figures. I've been making six figures for several years now and have funded most of our lifestyle. She had a history of putting me down, but as soon as she started making more money, it amplified considerably. She'd criticize everything I would do and nothing I did seemed to be right in her eyes. As an example, we'd go on several trips a year, at least one international and a few domestic, which I've always fully paid for. Although we travel more than most people, she said that she wasn't satisfied because I never flew her first class. Although we stay in nice hotels, clean and safe 4-plus-star hotels, she said they were never Instagram worthy. She'd often compare our life to influencers and I'd have to remind her that what she sees on social media is not real. We went on a vacation along with her parents and sister. On the last day, we visited a few sites and we began the several-hour trip to the airport. Everyone slept while I drove the family around. We flew back home and as soon as we deplaned, she started yelling at me on the concourse. She said so-and-so's husband is doing X for their wife, and demanded to know why I'm not doing the same for her. She kept yelling at me as we made our way through the terminal. It was all just one big blur. As soon as we got landside, I suggested I get the car from the parking garage while she grabs the checked-in luggage. I see her waiting by the door and I pulled up as far as I could before I got to the handicap loading zone. She was yelling at me to move closer and it didn't matter because it was late at night. Although no one was around, it still doesn't sit with me right to park in a handicap loading zone. She was mad and came up to the car and started yanking on the door handles. She dropped something in the car and went back for the luggage that was about 30 feet away. I was getting out to load the bags into the trunk. She yelled something at me and something in me snapped. I told her I was not going to put up with this anymore and told her to call an Uber home as I drove off. As I was leaving the airport, I had a change of heart and decided to turn around and pick her up. I came back to the terminal and she wasn't there anymore. I checked Find My and it looked like she was moving along with the AirTags in our luggage, so I assumed she must have gotten an Uber home. I come home and see a taxi in front of our home. It turned out she left her purse and phone in the car, while she went to go back for the luggage. She said it was some miracle from God that she found a taxi driver willing to drive her home without her wallet or phone, and that it was a sign for her to leave me. She moved out 2 weeks later and ultimately filed for divorce. I still think about that night. I question myself if things would have been different if I just kept my cool. I've lost my partner but I'm in a state of peace that I haven't been in a long time. How do I stop reliving that moment? I've since taken several trips through that airport and relive that incident every time. I've taken several flights since the incident and every time I pass by the area where this happened, the bottlenecked exit out of airside, I'm reminded of what happened. Sorry for the confusion. TLDR, I snapped and left my wife at the airport. It was the straw that made her leave and file for divorce. Edit, it's sad that people seem to think this is fake. I'm trying to be as detailed as possible without doxing myself. Why did I put up with it so long? We built a life together. We had our home, our friends, our dog, and it felt like it was time to start a family. When things were bad, they were terrible, but on the good days, they were amazing. We're both South Asian, and divorce has a terrible stigma in our culture. I made a commitment to this person and I planned on sticking with it. I'm not innocent. I have a terrible time communicating when someone is yelling at me. I walk away from the situation rather than fighting, especially in public. This in turn upsets her because she feels like she's not being heard, which makes her even more upset. Edit 2, although we're culturally the same, American-born South Asians, we had very different upbringings. My parents were first-generation immigrants who came to this country with nothing. Even though I didn't have brand name / designer anything growing up, I was in a very loving home. We had been going to couples counseling, and through that I learned about her abandonment issues. She grew up in a dysfunctional household. When she was a teenager, her dad moved to another state and was left to fend for herself from her narcissistic mother. Once we got married, her parents began living in the same household again to keep up appearances, but they live in separate bedrooms and go through bouts of not speaking to each other or delivering messages through their kids. I see a lot of parallels between us and her parents. Her mother would put down her father even in front of me. I can only imagine what's being said behind closed doors. Move on to the comment. This sounds toxic AF. Op subconscious saved him here. And she just got that 6-figure job, so no alimony. This guy won. For real. Sometimes the impulsive thing you do in a blur is a bad decision. This is not one of those times. As soon as I read Southeast Asian, I knew this was real, LOL. You have to see it to believe it. The constant comparing of yourself and your kids and SOS with others. It's on another level. Asterisk yes, everybody compares themselves, but those cultures are on another level. If you bring in a home, the first question is, what did XYZ get? Not a well done. This Asian culture is weird like that. My parents used to do comparisons a lot growing up, and I never liked that stuff. As a kid I would complain about that, and I would be labeled as conflictive and poor behaved. It took me leaving home for college to realize that shit was not okay. As I grew up, I learned to fend for myself and did not let them drag me to that stupid comparison game anymore. My younger siblings benefited from that, as my parents slowly become more mellow and stopped being assholes about comparing us with more successful families and their kids. Even if this one is, it does happen, apart from maybe leaving her at the airport part. I have had a similar experience. My ex was abusive, and one day I was driving us home from a friend's house. He was verbally abusing me and yelling at me the whole time. I don't even remember why. I told him to stop yelling at me while I was driving because it was stressing me out and making me feel unsafe to drive because he was distracting me, and that if he didn't stop I would make him get out. He didn't believe me, and kept yelling at me and berating me. So I pulled my car over on the side of the road and told him to get out. He did, and I drove away. At the time I felt extremely guilty. Now I look back at that incident and laugh. He 100% deserved it, and worse. He was fine BTW. Therapy has helped me a lot with processing what my abuser did to me and helping me to not feel guilty for standing up for myself. I strongly recommend it for anyone who has been in an abusive relationship. Fellow South Asian here, and yeah, I've personally seen this myself. LOL, definitely not fake in our community. I'm similar to you, where I tend to quiet down when yelling is occurring, since I did the same with my parents fighting. My dad would do the same thing, where he'd just wait for my mom's yelling to subside. I dated a SE Asian and I had similar experiences. Yelling. Nagging. Even a similar airport situation, but not as bad as yours. Your wife is very immature and emotionally unstable. Humiliation like that is wrong. Extremely disrespectful. Instagram comparisons. Just so immature. That train wreck of a woman did you a favor. I don't care how imperfect you are, few things could make you as insufferable and unattractive as what you've described here. I would have lost it years ago. Do yourself a favor and date someone fucking sane. Go talk to a therapist, op. Even if you're in a place of calm, you've lost a very turbulent part of your life. They can help you parse out your feelings and find ways to move past reliving the moment. I have South Asian friends. This is very real and I believe you. She had a history of putting me down, but as soon as she started making more money, it amplified considerably. She'd criticize everything I would do and nothing I did seemed to be right in her eyes. It's called verbal abuse. You were in a marriage where you were being verbally abused regularly. You keep reliving the airport incident because you experienced PTSD. Please go to a therapist to help you reconcile not only the divorce, but to recognize abusive behavior. I'm not innocent. I have a terrible time communicating when someone is yelling at me. I walk away from the situation rather than fighting, especially in public. This in turn upsets her because she feels like she's not being heard. Walking away when someone is yelling is the right thing to do. She has major anger issues, as well as communication issues. It all stems from her culture and she needs therapy, as well. No one, and I mean no one, likes being yelled at. There are ways to manage your anger, and until she learns how to do so, no grown adult will ever put up with verbally berated. Also, regarding PTSD, I want to reiterate that you are not only wrong, but your cavalier attitude is actually harmful to people. Check out the diagnostic criteria under D&E. You have watered down an incredibly serious disorder to ruminating about something unpleasant, which is normal. People with PTSD are often misunderstood and not treated great by society, and when someone who does not exhibit any pathology has PTSD, other people start to wonder why the difficult people, aka the people who actually meet criteria for the disorder, don't just get over it. The treatment options are already pretty abysmal and difficult to access. We don't need more people spreading ignorance and misunderstanding. I hope for your sake that you're a teenager who just doesn't have a solid grasp on what actual trauma is, and what a trauma response vs a full-blown disorder is. I hope you are able to get some perspective on this issue, because it would really be great if people stopped using PTSD the same way people say a neat freak has OCD. It's colloquial and was never meant to be. She was finna leave you anyways, my guy. This just rushed it? If that was her new personality, it was a blessing. The guys she want are going to deal with that attitude. This is why I strictly date bleeding hearts and women in caring job positions. It doesn't pay well, but they want to do something they're passionate about and they prioritize helping over salary. They're writers and they love you for you, plus those jobs are filled with brilliant people too. I don't, and I will never see the appeal in people who act like your wife. Anyone who has the capacity to act that way isn't a good person. Here's your opportunity to be with someone who has a heart of gold and not coal. I know so many couples like this. Especially where the woman is from a South Asian background and has learned this kind of behavior from her mother growing up. Literally the majority of South Asian background married women I know well enough to know what their relationship is like behave like this. She sounds horrible, insecure, and vain. The peace you feel sounds very welcomed and you will be much happier now. Yikes. Is all I can say. Probably not the best move to leave her there, but I honestly don't blame you. I would have snapped ages ago if I was dealing with that on the regular. You were pushed to your limit and finally stood up for yourself. Although not the healthiest of approaches, the message behind it is still standing up to a bully. That's what she's been to you. If she sees zero flaws for her historic behavior and sees this as a sign for divorce, good riddance. You can't change people like that. They will always be in the right in their own mind. Best to start preparing for the aftermath and talk to a lawyer. Don't you kind of agree with this? If she is demanding all these things, and you're at a level that you think it's fine where things are, maybe she needs to find someone who thinks money is more important than the person. That is what she seems to imply each time she is upset others do something and you do not. What will make her happy? Nothing. She will always be finding something that you do not have. Not a good person to be around. You should be able to find a more loving woman, while you're still young. If it was a woman being belittled by her husband left and right, it wouldn't even be a question in anyone's mind if leaving was the thing to do. She abused him. She's earning more than you. I wouldn't have moved out of the house, and I'd be asking for alimony. Also, him shutting down when being yelled at is not him not communicating well. She made it near impossible for him to defend himself in these moments. Some would say you can still try to discuss in a calm manner from your side or at a later point, but really who isn't hurt or distraught when being yelled at by someone you love on a regular basis? At some point you just shut down. I'm glad Up isn't subjected to this verbal abuse anymore. In this specific instance it seemed like the Op's partner was just entirely unreasonable, but in general it can be difficult finding a balance between validating your partner's anger and not wanting to be shouted at. I pretty much shut down as well if a partner is shouting at me, and it's pretty common sense that telling someone who is angry to calm down will only increase the problem. Can understand why someone on the receiving end would just walk away, but then the other person feels they're not being heard. I think the shouting itself is the problem. You can be heard without needing to get loud all the time. If anything, you'll be heard better. Both people need to be listened to, and both need to listen to the other. If there's a problem, and you're so angry that you want to scream at your partner, it's best to walk away for the moment, and come back when you know that you can express your anger in a way where your partner is able to hear you, and won't shut down/yell back. Escalating fights is just escalating, but constructive arguments are what's needed in relationships. Of course, this only works when both people are doing this. If one regularly yells at the other and they don't know what else to do, then just take it. That's just not right. Just take it. That's just not right. Just take it. That's just